And so how many acres do you think a guy needs to be able to do what you did?
I think a guy can do what I've done on as little as 7 to 10 acres, but probably the 18 to 20 acres, you can do exactly what I've done here and probably have just as good a luck.
Wow.
And successfully take a really nice buck every season.
So that really opens the door for a lot of people.
It sure does, because there's so many hunters that think, well, I don't have 100 acres, I can't do anything. Well, you can. This is my most active buck food plot I have on the property. If you start looking at the ground here, I mean, you know, this thing is torn up. Just look at this. Look at, you know, you got to think, it just rained. It rained 4 inches of rain a day and a half ago.
Right.
All this activity you see is just in the last 36 hours.
That's crazy.
Right here. And look at this. There's been a heck of a buck fight right here. Look how this is all torn up. They've been in here fighting, sparring.
Oh yeah, you can
look
see
at this.
that. Right.
You know, these are scrapes. All of these are scrapes. Right here. When we get up in here, and you know, look at the size of this scrape. It is just ripped.
Unbelievable. You can park a Volkswagen in there.
Tiny little, you know, small little food plot, but you know, often this is what it takes.
And this food plot can't be more than 1/8 of an acre?
1/8 of an acre, yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
About 100 feet by 40 to 50 feet.
And they work so much better than an acre plus food plot.
You know, as you get into your larger food plots, the deer lose the security. They can be in here during daylight in gun season in southern Michigan and feel safe. They're not going to go out into a 1 acre wide open field in daylight during those same conditions.
And that's good news, because that means you don't have to buy as much seed, you don't have to buy as much fertilizer, you don't have to buy as much lime, you don't need all the heavy equipment,
right.
So that opens the door for a lot of people to be able to do this.
It does. It gives people a really good opportunity. Look at this.
This is crazy. They have really torn this up.
They've just been in here just ripping, making scrapes, tearing these, and this is where I passed a real nice 120-inch buck this morning, just up in here.
Is that right?
Yeah, right here.
Wow.
You know, this is the scrape he was working on this morning when I first seen him, right here.
Yep.
Yeah, he was digging. Yeah, he was tearing in here because I'd done a little calling. Look at this trail. I have hinge cuttings off in there that typically is used by bucks, and you can see this is what they use. And just look at the trees, the scars and the rubs on all these trees. You know, it's very, you know, besides the fun and hunting, it's very gratifying to do this.
Exactly.
It really is.
And really, your property is probably worth a lot more now than if you were to just hang on to your big timber for lumber prices.
Yeah, this is a managed property. This is going to command high prices. I mean,
yeah.
Can you imagine a guy, if this was for sale, how many people would stand in line to buy this?
Right.
It's all set up, stands are in location.
Exactly.
And next year you're going to see 130 to 160 class bucks here.
Yep.
Look at this right here.
Unbelievable. Look at the depth of those tine marks. Hey?
Unbelievable. That is a good deer. God, he's been, man, what a nice buck using this area. And it's not the buck I saw this morning.
Jake, it's to the point I can hardly find a tree that's not been hit. This is nuts.
And look at this. See, there we go. There's these big angled rubs, you know. This started showing up here about 6 or 7 years ago, and I think I finally got to where every year I had mature old bucks in here. And now I have numbers of mature bucks competing amongst each other.
Yeah.
Instead of the one, I got 6 or 7 of them.
And that's why your calling and rattling works so well.
It really is. Look at that rub right there.
Crazy.
I mean, this thing is, no matter where we look, there are rubs. And I just want to show you this. I mean, here's a line of scrapes just about connected.
Yeah, there's only a little bit of space between
them. It's just one scrape after another scrape after another one for the next 30, 40 yards.
Crazy.
So, you know, you imagine how much time they spend in here doing their rutting activity. And if they're doing that, that's giving me an opportunity to kill one once in a while.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
you never sit in your stand and a day goes by you don't see a buck.
No, I've yet to do it.
That's crazy.
Even in gun season, I have not gone to a stand and not seen a buck.
You know, you've been telling me about this, and I'm going, you know, yeah, I believe it, but I sure would be nice to see it, and I can't even hardly believe it.
You know, there's a scrape right there, big old rub on it, you know, more of those angled rubs. And huge scrape, huge scrape. Years ago I had that tied down, and now it's growing that way. I actually took the string off of it. You know, this is just, yeah, I've been telling you about this and what I see here and what I've done. And I mean, look at this scrape right here from a pretty high, just one limb, but it's at the right position.
How gratifying would it be to teach a lot of guys on how to do this?
You know, and I absolutely love to see people become successful. And I really like to, you know, pass on this kind of information. I've spent years watching deer, seeing what makes deer scrape, what makes them feel comfortable bedding, what kind of food plots and what varieties do they like to use, and now I've got a process and it's working.
Exactly.
You know. Okay, you know, you can see right here, we just see all the old rubs, brand new fresh rubs, really big ones, medium-sized rubs. There's probably 10 or 12 scrapes right here within 5 or 10 yards of us. And what I was telling Randy is, if you walk 50 yards off of my border and walk into this neighboring property, you'll see a few rubs and a few scrapes, but the concentration really eliminates. And if you go to my east property and go on my neighbors over there, you'll see the same thing. Very few rubs, very few scrapes. This is where they're living. This is the core area.
Crazy.
And you can create this on your own, you know.
And how many acres?
This particular area is a 7-acre core with absolutely hundreds of scrapes and rubs. I mean, we've lost count already.
Now you can still see your house from here.
Yeah, you can.
And you know, you're in a spot where you see a lot of nice bucks.
This is where I killed a 5.5-year-old mature buck. He was laying right here within sight of my house. And I mean, we got scrapes right here. 2 years ago, there was a Boone and Crockett class buck used in this particular section.
Wow.
And
you're only 150 yards from your house.
I'm only 150 yards from my house. And you know, there's 6 or 7 scrapes right here.
And they're not small, Jake.
And they're not small. And I have an absolute giant one here. And that was my November 15th opening day stand right there.
Okay, yep.
And I snuck right in and I passed 8 bucks right here. They all came through right here.
November 15th.
November 15th. Everything from 1.5 to 3.5-year-olds.
Wow.
All came right through here. They all worked this scrape. Every one of them worked this licking branch.
You know, there's only one way that you can experience something like that, and that's to do what you've done.
Yeah, you know, it's time and work and energy, but you can have it. You know, those people that think they have to have 100 acres or be wealthy and go to Iowa and Kansas, you can have that. You can have good hunting in Michigan. You got to change how you hunt. You got to think. You got to learn. But as you do that, your hunting's going to get better. And I mean, you just look right in here. Look at that thick tangle of hinge cutting, strictly as a screen, so I can get into my stands without these deer laying 40 yards away seeing me.
And you know, that had never crossed my mind, you know, 5 years ago before I started learning about all this stuff.
And now you realize screening is really important. You know, if you can get by these deer and they can't see you, then they'll normally stay bedded, even if they hear a little disturbance or smell you. But if they make eye contact with you, they're usually up and on their feet.
Exactly. And so really, you also don't need a bunch of big equipment to do this.
No,
you don't need to bring in dozers and big farm equipment.
Yeah, I do this all with a really small, you know, 25 horsepower international tractor and a 6-foot wide disc. This is all, you know, done just in the spring. Look at the excellent growth. And you can, you know, if you zoom in, Randy, just look at all the stems where they're taking the tops of the clover off.
Right.
This is quite a food plot. It's just a small little stopping spot, but for the bucks, it's a great communication area.
Sure. And it's just long enough for you to get a shot off.
And look at the size of that scrape.
And
look how many bucks have been working on there just since the rain yesterday.
Yeah, right.
You know,
exactly.
There's all kinds of tracks.
And that thing is starting to get into a bowl situation.
Yeah, they've actually scooped it right out.
Exactly. It's just incredible.
And actually this high ladder stand right here is the one I did shoot my 5.5-year-old buck out of with my archery this year.
Okay.
And I spotted him getting up over here, and I called him up to here. He worked this licking branch, stopped here and worked this one. I wheezed at him, and he run right in on me down this trail.
Really?
I mean, he put his ears back and just powered right in. He didn't walk. He wanted to find out who his competition was.
And
you know, it's thick enough where he goes, oh, there's got to be a buck down in there, and he wanted to see who it was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you have enough bucks on here that the chance of that being a reality to him was very great.
Yeah.
Versus on state land, it's probably just another hunter.
Yeah. He was, you know, full of holes, antler wounds. He was a battled up deer. He was taking care of his girls around here, and he was going to claim his territory.
Nice.
But you know, you can just see again, look at all the different scrapes. You know, we've walked, I mean, in this 30-yard area, there's probably 25, 30 scrapes right here.
Exactly.
A lot of competition.
Right.
You know, this is a scraping lane. I do this on purpose. I want to encourage bucks to spend time here and communicate and rub and scrape and create competition. And you know, it's taken a few years, but once you do it and it starts, it'll continue to happen. You can't overhunt it. You got to hunt it smart.
Right.
But
I have never seen more scrapes in just this little walk that we've been on so far, Jake.
And here's, you know, this has always been traditionally my scraping tree, and they broke it off last year. So I brought this new oak limb down. Look at how they've chewed them, gnawed them. They took it right over.
And you've taken a piece of string, which
yeah, I've taken
a lot of guys have not heard about this before. Take a piece of string and tie it right down to the main trunk.
Tied it down so I could have this at about shoulder to armpit high. That seems to be the height they like. And there's no scent, no nothing.
Right.
Mother Nature took over. The bucks did it themselves.
So Jake, how much money do you spend on gimmicks like magic in a bottle?
I don't buy any of that stuff. You know, my goal is for those. I want to be invisible. I don't want deer to know I'm here.
Exactly.
I don't use any scents. And you know, here, you know, just big, you know, just big rubs everywhere you look.
Yeah.
Little tiny micro food plots.
Yeah.
If people think you can't attract a good number of bucks on a small property, you know, this right here shows it can be done.
And we haven't even hit 10% of your property
yet. No, we
yet.
haven't even been on 10% of it yet. And again, you know, this was a winter wheat field in 1989.
Nothing here, no trees.
Absolutely nothing. Wasn't a tree here.
Right.
Completely farmed. And that's when I took it out of the crop rotation and decided to start creating my own habitat.
Okay, so you say 20 years ago, and guys are thinking, okay, I don't have 20 years to wait. I don't want to wait 20 years. But you have answers to that, right?
Yes, there is. You know, I mean, the first thing you can do is just let it grow up and let these natural forbs get up and start carving out these little micro food plots. And then you can use sorghum and other annuals that get nice and tall and create the edge. So that literally the first season and for sure your second season, you're going to see a lot of what's happening here. And then as your volunteer tree species and trees that you plant, now you'll have trees for them to rub.
Right. And that sorghum, you can get a nice 8-foot, 10-foot tall screen
easily
in 1 year.
In 1 year. Yeah.
Right.
And it's going to work excellent. You know, every time I sit back here, I always know that any moment I could see absolutely the biggest buck I've ever seen. And I've killed some nice deer in my life. But I know that, you know, I know they're here. And so I feel fresh and I don't feel frustrated.
Right.
And even if I have a night with slow action, it's like, well, I didn't see him tonight, but I'll probably see him tomorrow. Or whatever that next day that I go in there.
And you have neighbors all around you.
All around me.
That would love to be able to hunt on this property, and they hunt as close as they can.
They hunt as close as they can, and they're more brown and downers than anything else. But these deer know where safety is.
Right.
And they're, I mean, you know, to kill a 5.5-year-old buck on a small property in this area says something about that buck knew where safety was.
Right. And you have more bucks, Jake, than you know what to do with.
You know, I saw so many bucks. I keep really good records. I mean, I passed an unbelievable. I mean, if I was to recite the number, people would think I'm just talking, but it's multiple dozens of good bucks that I let go by.
And you don't do this with any big equipment, right?
No, it's all done with a chainsaw, a small tractor, and a trailer. You know, and all my food plots, you can do it with a 4-foot disc, and you can do it. You know, you can start out as small as an ATV, and I even know some people with garden tractors that do it.
And so your property is 67 acres, but how small of a property could you have all that deer sign and all that concentration of buck activity? How small of an area?
Well, I have 2 clients that are very successful, and one guy has 7 acres and the other guy has 8 acres.
And he's got the kind of activity.
And he's got probably 6 different food plots, and he's planted all kinds of trees and shrubs and brush, and he's got probably half a dozen real small micro bedding areas, and they're killing deer in that 115 to 130 class. every year on his property where he never would see deer before. It was just a wide open alfalfa field.
These are, I mean, the food plots are what, 1/8 of an acre?
Yep, most of them are the 1/8, 10th of an acre. He might have a 1/4 acre here and there.
Crazy.
And, you know, it's all about just forcing those bucks to compete with each other and constantly go from one food plot to the other, checking for the does and working the scrapes and leaving the sign.
And you have hunters all around your property.
All around my property.
That would love to shoot the deer that's on your property,
Yep.
but yet they probably very rarely see these deer, don't they?
They seldom see them because they feel real safe here and they just stay here all day. And they get out at night and they move around, they chase the does, but they're back on my property by daylight. You know, one of the things I've done as a hunter before I became a land manager was I just always wrote down every one of my hunts. I guess it's the engineer in me. I'm a retired engineer. And so since the early 80s, I have written down every hunt, every stand location, including the weather conditions, the wind, and the moon phase. And we'll walk over here, and it's an older handwritten book, but it's just an example of years and years of my hunting logs. So I can track down, and this is 2010, and this is right off from October 1st, and whether it was a morning hunt or an evening hunt, the location, the weather conditions, the number of deer I saw, and that's like, I try to indicate whether it's does, fawns, antlered bucks, and mature bucks, and if I'm able to see that it's an 8-point or a 9-point, I write that down and how many hours I'm on stand. And you know, what I do at the end of each season is I tabulate how many bucks I've seen versus how many hunts I've done. And this year, I've passed 87 bucks, and it's turned out to be about 3.8 bucks per hunt is my average. Now this morning I only saw 1 buck, so this morning was a low average, but this is late November after the rut, so still not bad though. But the neat thing I get out of this is over the years I learned the trends of deer movement based on moon phase, weather conditions, and time of the year. So I compare them from year to year to kind of help me decide which stand I'm going to pick.
And this is all stuff that you're going to share in these videos and inside the site.
Yes, I am.